Single mom fired for revealing secret to Mafia boss. What he did next shocked everyone. The final closing hour at Leighton's had come at last, leaving behind a lingering scent of garlic butter and red wine that clung stubbornly to my faded uniform shirt. My feet throbbed inside the black shoes I had bought secondhand from a thrift store, and my lower back felt like it might snap after so many hours bent over, serving guests who never even looked up as I set down their plates. 3 shifts in a row, each one 12 hours long, and I still didn't have enough to cover this month's rent. The manager's voice rang out, sharp as a blade. "Claire, clear table 8. And get table 12 ready for Mr. Maddox. He'll be here in 20 minutes. Everything needs to be perfect." I froze when I heard that name. Grant Maddox, a man spoken of in Savannah with a mix of reverence and fear. Some said he owned half the riverfront hotels. Others claimed he controlled places too dangerous to name. I had been working at Leighton's for 6 months and had seen him walk through our doors every Thursday night, like clockwork, always accompanied by men in black suits, faces expressionless, their voices low and edged with menace. I bent down to gather the last of the dishes from table 8, my hands trembling as a knife slipped and clattered to the floor with a sharp metallic ring. I was so tired my mind was blank, my hands cracked and dry, my heart pounding at the thought of another long shift. My anxiety medication still sat on the kitchen shelf at home, untouched, because I had chosen instead to pay for my daughter's school fees. 1 more week until payday. 1 week of instant noodles and tap water. Just a week, I told myself. Just a week. But all I felt inside was emptiness. "Sorry," I murmured, though no one was listening. The whole restaurant seemed to shift whenever Grant Maddox arrived. Staff moved more quietly. Voices dropped. Even the lights seemed colder somehow. I had managed to avoid serving his table all these months. But tonight, luck had slipped through my fingers. Vanessa, my closest coworker, had called in sick, and the manager offered no sympathy. Just a curt, "No one else is available. He tips well. Do a good job." I kept my head down and finished setting the table, spacing each fork, each wineglass with practiced precision, checking everything one last time. And then the front door opened. A chill of autumn air swept in, carrying with it the sharp sweetness of expensive cologne and something else I couldn't name. I didn't need to look up to know he had arrived. The pace inside the restaurant slowed, the chatter died down to a hush, and the only sounds were the faint clinks of silverware on china. Grant Maddox walked in with 2 men dressed in black. One of them scanned the room with eyes like blades, slicing through every corner before giving a small nod. Only then did Grant step forward. He moved with the ease of someone who had never been told no, who had never had to wait or ask for permission. His charcoal gray suit clung to his broad frame, and the lines of his face were sharp and stern. Nearing 50, he still looked younger than people expected, with neatly combed salt and pepper hair and deep black eyes that reflected something unreadable. I bent down to adjust a napkin that didn't need fixing, trying to keep my head low, to hide from his gaze. My heart pounded like it might burst, my mouth dry, my hands trembling. I only had 3 tables tonight, and one of them was his. I told myself to stay calm. I had survived worse days than this, right? I heard the manager's tone shift into something more polished, more servile, as he approached. "Good evening, Mr. Maddox. Your usual table is ready." I stepped back into the kitchen, leaning against the cold brick wall, drawing in a deep breath to steady myself. Through the small round window in the door, I saw Grant settle into his seat, facing the entrance. The 2 other men took up their usual stations, one standing silently by the bar, scanning the room. "What are you doing, Claire?" Lily's voice pulled me back. She stood beside me, holding a tray of appetizers, her eyes curious. "Table 12, right?" I nodded, forcing a crooked smile. "Don't worry," she whispered. "He's not as scary as he looks." Then she paused, a small smile tugging at her lips. "At least, not when other people are watching." My cheeks flushed with heat. I looked down and filled a water pitcher, adding slices of lemon with hands that barely obeyed me. "Any advice?" I asked. Lily leaned in, her voice low. "Be invisible until he needs you. Don't make eye contact unless he speaks to you. And whatever you do, don't spill anything on that suit." I nodded, took another breath, and stepped out with the pitcher in hand. My hands were shaking so badly the ice cubes clinked loudly against the glass. I tried to steady my voice. "Good evening, sir. I'm Claire, your server tonight." My voice sounded strange, too high and hoarse. He didn't respond immediately. I glanced up, just for a moment, and met his gaze. That look froze me in place. It wasn't mocking or leering like so many others. It was the gaze of someone reading every secret I had ever tried to bury. For a second, I felt exposed, like he could see right through the fragile calm I wore like armor. I looked away quickly, my voice unsteady. "Tonight's special is pan-seared salmon with lemon butter sauce." "Bring me the usual," he said, his voice deep and smooth, like aged wine, "and a bottle of the Merlot from 2017. I nodded, turned to leave, grateful that the exchange had ended so quickly. But then his voice came again. "Wait." I stopped, back still facing him, then slowly turned. "Yes, sir. Are you new?" "Not exactly," I said quietly. 6 months now." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or displeasure that he hadn't noticed me before. 6 months. "And this is the first time you've served me?" I didn't know what to say. Did he keep track of the staff? The thought chilled me. "Vanessa is out sick," I offered, instantly regretting the unnecessary detail. He just stared at me in silence. I lowered my gaze. As I turned away, my heart was still racing. I didn't yet know that by the end of that night, my life would begin to shift in a way I couldn't yet imagine, that every step I took and every beat of my heart would slowly begin to trace a path toward that man. Before we continue with the next part of the story, if this has stirred something deep within you, don't forget to subscribe to the Dear Single Mom channel, hit the like button, and share this video to help bring more silent struggles, more untold lives into the light they deserve. Where are you listening from? Leave a comment below with the name of your city, your state, or your country, so we can see just how far this story has reached. Every time you share, it's like lighting a small lantern, casting warmth and hope toward another soul who may be feeling lost in the dark. And now, let us return to the next part of the story. I returned to the kitchen, setting the water pitcher down on the stainless steel counter, my hands still trembling ever so slightly. Lily glanced at me, raising her eyebrows and asking softly, "What did he say?" I shook my head. "Just ordered. Like usual." But the truth was, nothing about it felt usual, not the way he looked at me, as if I were an open book laid bare before him, and he was reading each line slowly, deliberately, with a kind of quiet certainty. I picked up a cloth and began wiping my tray, needing to keep my hands busy, to ground myself. Lily turned back to her tray of drinks, and I took a deep breath, reaching into my apron pocket for today's menu. As I prepared to return to his table to confirm the wine, I reached up absent-mindedly and scratched just behind my right ear. A strange habit I'd had since childhood, one that surfaced whenever I was anxious, a small gesture meant to calm myself. I didn't know that this small movement had just triggered a chain reaction I could never have foreseen. I walked back to table 12, standing at just the right distance, careful not to intrude on his space. I gave a brief explanation of the dish being prepared and confirmed the vintage of the wine he had requested. He nodded slightly, eyes still fixed on the glowing screen of his phone, not once glancing up at me. I turned to leave, grateful that the exchange had ended quickly once again. But just as I stepped away, one of the 2 men who had entered with him left his post near the bar and walked briskly across the dining room toward the back exit. The other glanced at me too, a brief flick of the eyes, but one that was clearly deliberate. My heart skipped. Something was off. There was a watchfulness in them now, or suspicion. A dozen absurd possibilities flickered through my mind. Had I done something wrong? Said something inappropriate? Touched the wineglass too long? No, that couldn't be. I bit my lip, trying to shake the thought. Back in the kitchen, I had barely touched the tray of plated food when the manager called my name. "Claire, Mr. Maddox just changed the request. He wants you to bring the wine out personally." I frowned. That wine was always served by Lily. She had a sommelier certificate after all. But Marco didn't offer an explanation. He just said, "He wants you." I didn't have the option to say no. I went to the small wine cellar behind the bar and retrieved the bottle of Merlot, my hand still unsteady. Grant Maddox didn't ask for things without a reason. That much was certain. I told myself maybe it was just a whim. Maybe he didn't want to wait. Maybe. But I didn't believe much in coincidence when it came to a man like him. I returned to the dining room and opened the cork slowly, the scent of ripe red grapes spilling out stronger than usual as the cork came free with a soft pop. I poured a small measure into his glass and waited. He took a sip, nodded, then gestured for me to fill the remaining glasses. As I turned to go, his voice came unexpectedly. "Do you know what that signal means?" I froze. "Excuse me?" I turned back, blinking. He leaned back in his chair, the ice in his eyes now replaced with something more piercing, something veiled and knowing. "The touch to your right ear. The double scratch. That's a signal. A silent one. People use it when they're asking for help, but can't say it out loud. Did you know that?" My eyes widened. I shook my head. No, I'm just nervous, sir. It's a habit. I didn't mean anything by it. Grant studied me for a long moment, eyes unblinking. Is that so? I swallowed hard, clutching my hands together. I don't need anything. I'm fine. He didn't answer right away, just nodded slowly, as if noting what I said, but not entirely convinced. I dipped my head, gave a quick thank you, and walked away quickly, heart pounding like I'd sprinted a mile. Lily was waiting just inside the kitchen, her face clouded with concern. "What was that?" she asked. I shook my head, unable to form a proper answer, but inside me, something had shifted. I had accidentally touched something I wasn't supposed to, or someone. For the rest of the night, each time I stepped toward table 12, I felt Grant Maddox's eyes tracking my every move. It wasn't a leering gaze, but a calculating one, watching my gestures, my posture, my tone, as though he were trying to decode something he believed I was hiding. And then I realized something else. His men were no longer scanning the restaurant. They were watching me. That night, for the first time in years, I felt myself caught at the center of something far larger, more dangerous, and more unpredictable than anything I had ever known. And all of it had begun with a single unconscious touch to my right ear. The next morning, a soft rain fell across the city, each fine droplet clinging to the glass window of the small apartment I called home. I woke with a quiet unease lodged in my chest, as though some part of last night's dream had refused to fade. The image of Grant Maddox lingered in my mind, especially the way he had looked at me, the kind of gaze no one had ever given me before. I made myself a weak cup of coffee with warm water from the little kettle, sipping it slowly while counting the bills and coins left in my wallet. Not even $10. I sighed and opened the fridge. There were a few eggs, half a loaf of bread, and a carton of milk nearing expiration. Just a few more days, I told myself. A few more days until payday. I pulled on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and reached for my hat, ready to catch the bus like I always did for my afternoon shift at Leighton's. But as I opened the door and stepped outside, something strange happened. A sleek black Lincoln was parked right in front of the rundown apartment building. A tall man in a dark suit stood beside it, sunglasses hiding his eyes, his posture calm but commanding. I froze. That couldn't be. Before I could say a word, he gave a small nod. "Miss Claire Whitmore?" I nodded slowly, my heart already beginning to race. "I've been sent to take you to work." His voice was even, polite, but gave nothing away. Immediately, alarm bells rang inside me. "Sent by who?" I asked, my voice unsteady. He didn't answer directly, just said, "Someone didn't want you to have to stand in the rain, packed on a crowded bus." Nothing more than that, nothing dangerous. His tone was gentle, but it carried no invitation for refusal. I glanced at the car. Spotless, leather interior, the faint scent of mint, a world away from mine. I hesitated, but finally stepped in, every muscle tensed with uncertainty. The ride to the restaurant was smooth and quiet. The driver didn't speak. A soft instrumental melody played just loud enough to muffle the sound of rain on the windows. When we arrived, someone from the staff was already waiting at the back entrance with the door open, as if every detail had been arranged in advance. I stepped into the kitchen, took off my coat, and immediately noticed Lily staring at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "Who brought you here?" she whispered as I changed into my uniform. I shook my head, voice low as breath. I'm not exactly sure, but inside me, one name rang loud and clear: Grant Maddox. He didn't come in that evening. Not once did I see his face. And yet, his presence hung in the air like the echo of a bell, distant but unmistakable, as though he were watching from a place just beyond my reach. When the shift ended and I stepped into the locker area, I saw a small box resting on the shelf above my things. I looked around. No one seemed to notice. I opened it. Inside was a silver bracelet, simple, sturdy in its design. On the inside, 3 small words had been engraved: "Stay with strength." I held my breath, heart pounding. There was no card, no note, just the bracelet. I had never received a gift like that before. I stared at it for a moment, then quickly slipped it into my coat pocket, afraid someone might see. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of rain against the glass, my thoughts heavy. Why would he care about me? Was it just because of that unconscious gesture the night before? A simple scratch behind the ear and now all this? Or was there something else in me he had noticed? Something I couldn't see in myself? I didn't know. But one thing was clear. Things were slipping beyond my control. And what unsettled me more than anything was the strange feeling growing inside me, a mix of fear and protection, as if I were both being hunted and sheltered. It was a feeling I couldn't name, like walking a tightrope strung between two high towers. One side was the abyss I already knew, the familiar fall of hardship and survival. The other was something that might be safer, might hold more, but was still shrouded in shadow. And somewhere in the space between, I was suspended, one step from losing balance, unsure how many steps I had left before I fell. It was early Monday morning, and the sky had yet to fully lighten. The street lamps still flickered weakly, casting long reflections onto the wet sidewalk. I pulled my coat collar up against the cold, walking briskly, already running late. The Lincoln was there again, parked at the corner, its polished black frame glinting faintly in the mist. The same driver opened the door without a word. I nodded silently, no longer needing to ask questions. I had grown used to this quiet routine, but somewhere deep inside, an unease had begun to stir, not because of the car or the man who drove it, but because of a pair of eyes I had seen just moments before, across the street from the rundown building I called home. A man was standing there, leaning against a lamppost, a baseball cap pulled low over his face. As I passed, he turned his head away, but not fast enough to keep me from recognizing the outline of his body, the way his shoulders settled, the tilt of his stance. My blood turned cold. Jason. I thought I had left him behind in the last city, in the wreckage of everything that had fallen apart. I had believed that if I stayed gone long enough, hidden well enough, he would stop looking, but I was wrong. He had found me. I couldn't concentrate for the rest of my shift. I dropped a knife, spilled water, and Lily had to quietly remind me 3 times to keep it together. Even the manager began to glance my way more often than usual. I avoided looking out the window that faced the main road. Each time someone passed by, a shadow or a figure blurred by rain, my heart slammed against my ribs. By the end of the shift, I stepped into the locker room and found a paper envelope clipped to my locker door. No name, no markings. I opened it. Inside was a copy of a bank transaction, a money transfer into my account. Underneath it, a single line was handwritten. The price for your silence. Don't ever forget I know where you are. My hands clenched around the thin paper, damp with sweat. He was reminding me. I still owed him. Not money, but silence. Secrets. I left the restaurant in a haze, and the Lincoln was already waiting. I climbed inside without a word. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror. Are you all right? I didn't answer. We turned off the main road and onto a quieter street, and then, without warning, the car came to a slow stop. A man was already waiting on the sidewalk. He approached the car, opened the door, and sat down beside me. He wasn't Grant Maddox. He was younger, taller, his expression hard and unreadable, dressed in all black. I stiffened. Who are you? I asked. He spoke slowly. My name is Miles. I work for Mr. Maddox. He wants to know if you feel threatened. I didn't answer right away. Questions were already piling in my mind, rising fast. How much did Maddox know? How could he possibly know what was happening? I hadn't told a soul. I only nodded, hesitant. I think he's found me. Miles didn't have to ask who I meant. He reached into his coat and pulled out another envelope. Inside is information about a man named Jason Miller. We've been watching him for a few days. He arrived 3 nights ago. He's staying at a motel 3 blocks from your apartment. He's followed you at least twice. I opened the envelope. Inside were black and white surveillance photos. Jason standing near the bus stop. Jason on the opposite corner from the restaurant. Jason stepping out of the small grocery store near my building. My fingers went numb. My legs felt hollow. I wasn't safe anymore. Miles continued, his tone measured. Mr. Maddox doesn't tolerate threats to his people. I shook my head. I'm not his. Miles tilted his head slightly. Then whose do you want to be? I had no answer. I stared ahead, silent. That night, I received a message from an unknown number. Just 4 words on the screen. Stop or lose everything. I knew it was Jason. I knew that tone, that threat. He never bluffed. But this time, I wasn't alone. The next morning, when I arrived at work, Lily was holding a small package. Someone dropped this off for you. No name. I opened it. Inside was a new black phone, still in its packaging, screen untouched. At the bottom of the box was a single card with a handwritten note. This is a secure line. Use it when needed. There was no signature, no explanation, but I knew. I didn't need to see his name to understand where it came from. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I didn't have to keep running. But I also knew with absolute clarity when Grant Maddox stepped in, nothing ever stayed simple. Rain fell steadily that afternoon, a quiet, steady rhythm against the roof of the restaurant. When Miles appeared again behind Leighton's, he didn't come into the kitchen this time. He waited under the back awning with his black umbrella, the same way he had before. I no longer questioned how he always knew the exact moment my shift would end. But tonight, there was something different in his eyes. Not just the usual alertness. There was urgency. The kind that made time feel thinner, faster. "Mr. Maddox would like to see you. Now." He said it without explanation. I hesitated, but in the end, I nodded. The truth was, I had already stepped past the boundary I once told myself I would never cross. The Lincoln moved slowly along the riverfront street, its headlights brushing across cobblestones and puddles. Soft, golden light spilled from the windows of old shops, reflected in ripples on the water. I had never been to this part of the city at night. It was quiet in a way that felt detached from the world. No voices. Only the sound of rain tapping on the roof and the distant hum of jazz from a bar that had closed early. When the car turned down a narrow lane marked Riverwalk, the atmosphere changed completely. Elegant federal-style homes lined the street, each with tall white columns and curling wrought iron balconies, but one house stood out. It was a 3-story white house with gray-blue shutters and warm light glowing from its ground-floor windows. The iron gate opened just as we arrived, as if someone had been watching. Miles said nothing, only opened the door for me. I stepped out, a tightness gathering in my chest from the stillness that hung over everything. I climbed the steps, and before I could knock, the door opened. An older woman stood there, wearing a cream-colored sweater, her silver hair pinned back neatly. Her expression wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't warm either. "Come in," she said plainly, then led me through a hallway lined with dark wood floors and oil paintings. The house felt like it belonged to another century. The scent of pine wood, leather, and old coffee hung faintly in the air. In the living room, a fire flickered low in the hearth, its golden light dancing on the walls. I stopped at the threshold. "He's waiting for you in the back," she said, turning away before checking whether I would follow. I walked down the hallway and paused before a half-open door. Grant Maddox stood inside with his back to me, pouring wine from a tall bottle into 2 glasses on a wide wooden table. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His salt and pepper hair was slightly tousled, as though he had been wrestling with the day. "Come in," he said, without needing to look. I stepped inside slowly, unsure whether to stand or sit, to speak or stay quiet. He turned, handed me a glass. Merlot. The same vintage as that first night. I accepted it carefully. He sank into a deep armchair near the fireplace and gestured to the seat across from him. "Do you feel safe, Claire?" The question caught me off guard. I nodded. Then, after a beat, shook my head. "I don't know." He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing the exact words he would use. "Jason Miller won't bother you again." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, I've had my people take care of it. No violence. Just a reminder." He smiled faintly. I tightened my grip on the wineglass, my thoughts spinning. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or frightened. He had helped me, but I didn't know how, or why. "Why would you do that?" I asked. "You don't even know me. I'm just a waitress at a restaurant you happen to visit." He set his glass down and leaned back. "Because I saw something in your eyes. Something I don't often see. Not fear. Resilience. A person holding herself together with everything she has. Someone surviving, but refusing to fall." I said nothing, staring instead at the fire that crackled gently in the hearth. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. "This is the key to your room. Upstairs. You can stay here as long as you need. No one will bother you." I wasn't good at thank yous. I looked at him, my mouth opening slightly, but he was already rising to his feet. "Get some real sleep, Claire. Tomorrow is a new day." Then he left the room, and I was alone with the firelight, the warmth of the house, and the quiet confusion blooming in my chest. I didn't know exactly where I stood anymore, but one thing had become clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the sound of the wind brushing against the windows. I couldn't sleep that night, even though the room on the second floor offered a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. The white linens were clean and soft, the bedside lamp cast a gentle golden light, and everything was so perfectly in place, it made me uneasy. But inside me, a storm had begun to churn without a name or warning. I sat against the headboard, clutching the pillow to my chest. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't running. And maybe that's why the memories came back. They didn't knock. They didn't ask permission. They simply seeped in, slow and quiet, like water finding its way through a crack, soaking into the last dry places of my mind. And with them came a name Amy spreading across my thoughts like ink on paper. She had once been my closest friend, my sister in everything but blood. We met when I was 20, working as receptionists at a small hotel in Charlotte. Amy was 3 years older, braver, louder, the kind of woman who showed me how to stand tall just by the way she spoke. She was the first to teach me how to defend myself with words, how to smile when someone tried to make me feel small. She once told me something I've never forgotten. If you want to survive, sometimes you have to make people fear you more than pity you. But Amy, for all her fire, never learned to fear. And it cost her. It began in the spring of the year I turned 25. Amy had started seeing a man named Jason Miller. He was charming, polished, always knew just the right thing to say. But I didn't like him. There was something too smooth, too carefully assembled about him. Something that made my stomach tighten. Amy didn't see it. Or maybe she didn't want to. She fell fast. Within a few months, they moved in together. And after that, I saw her less and less. And she changed. She became quiet, guarded. I began to notice the bruises on her arms. She said she'd tripped, or bumped into furniture. I asked. She smiled and brushed it off. "Don't worry, Claire. I can take care of myself." I don't know exactly what happened the night it all ended. Only that the next morning, police knocked on my door. They said Amy had died. A fall. From the third-floor balcony. It was ruled an accident. Jason was never charged. But I knew. I saw it in his eyes at the funeral, in the faint smirk as he passed me by. He wasn't innocent. A few weeks later, while I was helping pack her apartment, I found a letter she had hidden. No return address, but I knew her handwriting. The date at the top was 3 days before she died. Amy wrote that she was afraid, that Jason had started tracking her calls, managing all the money, controlling everything she said and did. She didn't dare leave. He had threatened her, said that if she tried to go, someone else would pay the price. The letter ended with one line that has haunted me ever since. "If I don't make it through this week, Claire, you have to leave. Don't ask questions. Don't fight him. Just go." Before I could even process it, Jason found me reading it. He ripped the letter from my hands, his eyes cold with rage. He didn't destroy it. He kept it. He knew what it meant. Knowing what was in that letter was the reason I left Charlotte. In the pouring rain 3 years ago. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't leave a note. I packed a small bag, some cash, and my ID, and I disappeared. I changed addresses constantly, avoided using my bank cards, never kept the same work schedule for too long. And yet, Jason still found me. I don't know how, but the envelopes with money, the nameless texts, they kept coming. Like smoke from a fire I couldn't see, but that never went out. I was trapped in a game I didn't know the rules to, until Grant Maddox. I still don't know what he is in this story. A savior, a stranger, a dangerous variable I haven't yet learned to read. But I do know this, whatever he is, I can't keep hiding from the past if I want to have a future, if I want to live. I got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out into the quiet garden behind the house. The moon slipped through the trees, pale and distant. I let out a breath. Tonight, I remembered everything, and I understood something I hadn't dared admit before. Amy's death wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something else. And that door, it's open now. Whether I'm ready or not, I have no choice but to walk through it. That afternoon the air was strangely heavy, warm in a way it shouldn't have been for late autumn. I arrived at Leighton's an hour early, hoping the rhythm of work might quiet the thoughts that had haunted me through the night. But the moment I stepped through the back door, Lily came running, her face pale with worry. "There's a man waiting out front," she whispered. "He asked for you." My heart stopped for half a beat. I knew who it was. I walked slowly toward the doorway that looked out into the main dining room and peered through the glass. He was there, Jason Miller. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his tie askew, his face thinner than I remembered, but the eyes were the same. The eyes of a man who didn't know where the line was, or simply didn't care. When he turned toward me, a cold smile cut across his mouth. I tried to back away, but it was too late. "Claire." His voice struck through the air like something breaking. The whole restaurant seemed to go still. Faces turned toward me. He moved faster than I could react. "You've been hiding a long time," he said softly, almost tenderly, as his hand clamped around my wrist, fingers pressing too hard. I tried to pull free, but his grip only tightened. Lily gasped. A few coworkers hurried over, but Jason ignored them, dragging me toward a corner. "I want to talk, right now." "Not here," I said, breath catching. He gave a thin smile. "Then you pick the place. The time. Like you always do when you run." He shoved me lightly, but enough that I stumbled, nearly falling. It all happened in seconds, and then the restaurant doors swung open. No one needed to say his name. You could feel it, the change in the room, the silence that followed. Grant Maddox. He didn't speak at first. He just walked forward, slow and deliberate, every step quiet but commanding. Jason turned and gave a crooked grin. "Who's this? Your new bodyguard?" he sneered. Grant stopped in front of him, not even glancing his way at first. He looked only at me. "Claire, are you all right?" I nodded, but my whole body was rigid. Jason chuckled. "What a small world. Looks like someone's taken quite an interest in you." Grant turned to face him then, his voice calm and even. "Jason Miller, isn't it? I've heard your name, and I've heard enough to know you shouldn't be here." Jason laughed sharply. "And who are you supposed to be? The police?" Grant didn't answer. He simply said, quietly but with a weight that filled the room, "Leave, now." The words weren't loud, but they landed like stone. Jason hesitated, eyes flickering between us. Then he stepped back, but as he reached the door, he turned, his glare searing through me. "This isn't over." And then he was gone, leaving behind a silence thick enough to hear the clock on the wall. I didn't go home that night. Grant asked me to sit at a corner table near the window, where the soft yellow light pooled over the white linen. He sat across from me, a cup of black coffee untouched. "I know you're hiding something," he said quietly, "and I want to hear it from you." I drew in a long breath. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. There was no place left to retreat. So I told him. I told him everything about Amy, the letter, the night she died, about the years I'd spent running, the money transfers, the nightmares, the names I changed, the cities I left behind. When I finished, I couldn't meet his eyes. My hands were locked together in my lap. I waited for disbelief, for judgment, maybe even for pity, but he said nothing for a while. Then he reached over, poured more coffee into my cup, and spoke softly. "If what you're telling me is true, Jason Miller isn't just a threat. He's a danger, and you won't have to face him alone anymore." I looked up, my voice barely a whisper. "You believe me?" Grant's gaze met mine, and for the first time, it wasn't cold. "Not quite belief," he said. "But I believe the eyes of someone who's already lost everything. And I see that in you." He stood, sliding on his coat. "Come on. You shouldn't stay here any longer. It's time Jason learned he's made a mistake. And this time, I won't let him hurt anyone else." I followed him out into the damp, cooling air, my heart hollow but strangely lighter. I didn't know what waited ahead, only that for the first time in years, I had stopped running, and that choice, small as it seemed, felt like the beginning of something new. The sky over Savannah that day hung low and gray, like a warning whispered across the wind. Gusts swept through the cobbled streets, stirring dust and the damp breath of the river into the air. Grant Maddox sat inside a black car parked behind an abandoned warehouse near the docks, surrounded by rusting shipping containers and the distant metallic clatter of chains and steel. He didn't glance out the window. He only watched the time. When the secondhand ticked past 12, a silver car rolled in and came to a halt 20 paces away. Jason Miller stepped out, dressed more neatly than usual, but the arrogance in his gait was unchanged. He moved with the swagger of a man who believed the world owed him control. He wasn't afraid. If anything, he seemed amused. When he saw Grant emerge from his car, he chuckled. "I thought you'd go for something more old school," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You know, guys in black suits, blindfolds, rope. The works." Grant didn't answer. With a small gesture, he signaled for Miles, who had exited the car beside him, to hold back. This conversation would be between two men, and only two. Jason closed the distance, hands slipping casually into his coat pockets. "Let's get to it. You dragged me out here for what? Threats? Negotiation?" "This isn't a threat," Grant replied, his voice level, cold. "I'm here for something she needs." Jason let out a dry laugh. "She needs a lot of things, you know that? Freedom, forgetting, maybe even forgiveness, but everything comes at a price." "I want the letter," Grant said. His tone didn't rise, but each word landed with weight. "The letter Amy left behind." Jason narrowed his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't pretend. I know you have it. And I know why you've kept it." Jason glanced around once, then looked back at Grant. "Let's say I do. So what? What are you offering? A promise to stay away from her? A briefcase of hush money? Grant took a step forward, his gaze sharp enough to draw blood. No. I'm not bargaining. I'm not negotiating. I'm giving you a warning. If you don't hand over that letter, everything you've tried to keep buried will come to light. I already have records, financial trails, suspicious transfers, testimonies, law enforcement ignored because something was missing. That letter is the missing piece. For the first time, Jason faltered. The smugness drained slightly from his face. You couldn't have all that, he said, though his voice was quieter now. Grant tilted his head. I'm not the police. I'm not bound by red tape. I have time, money, and a damn good reason to burn your world down if you force my hand. Jason stood silent. The wind picked up again, tugging at the hem of his coat. Finally, he reached into the inside pocket and pulled out an old, creased brown envelope. This is all that's left. The original. No copies. Grant took it, his eyes never leaving Jason's. He opened it slowly. Inside, the familiar slant of Amy's handwriting ran across the page, steady, unmistakable. How do I know you won't come after me now that you have it? Jason asked, voice edged with something close to fear. Grant gave a small, humorless smile. If I'd wanted to come after you, you wouldn't still be standing. Jason swallowed. So, what now? You want me gone? No, Grant said, slipping the envelope inside his coat. I want you to understand something. From this day forward, if anyone tied to me or to Claire is followed, threatened, or even looked at the wrong way, I won't come to talk next time. I'll come to end it. Jason's eyes went cold. I get it. He turned, walked back to his car without another word, and drove off into the grayness. Grant remained where he was, the wind ruffling his hair, his coat shifting with the breeze. He looked down at the letter again, folding it carefully, like it was something sacred, something that belonged not just to the past, but to everything that came after. On the drive back, Miles asked from the driver's seat, Do you trust him? Grant stared out the window. No. But I trust he understands now. I'm not someone he should have touched. And Claire? She's not a silent victim anymore. The silence is over. And this time, every voice will be heard. 3 days after Grant confronted Jason, no one had seen him around the neighborhood again. Miles confirmed what I had already begun to suspect, that Jason had left Savannah at dawn, catching the last westbound bus, disappearing without a word, without a message, without the usual signals he used to remind me he was always watching. No anonymous envelopes, no strange calls, no lingering figure across the street. I didn't know what Grant had said to him that night behind the warehouse, but I felt the weight of it in the silence Jason left behind. And for the first time in 3 years of living in fear, I stepped outside without glancing over my shoulder. I didn't hold my breath when someone walked too close behind me. I began to sleep through the night, to eat with an appetite I had forgotten I possessed. I smiled at Lily, and this time, it didn't feel like I had to force it, but peace didn't arrive wrapped in comfort. It came with a quiet emptiness I hadn't expected. When the danger vanished, I realized I had lived so long in survival mode that I no longer knew how to exist without it. What do you do when there's nothing left to run from? I stood in the familiar second-floor room of Grant's house, looking out at the backyard bathed in soft afternoon light. Everything was still as it had been the first day I arrived. Only now I had a key to the room, and I no longer tensed at the sound of footsteps in the hall. I had begun helping Judith, the housekeeper, dusting the living room shelves, watering the potted plants on the porch, preparing dinner on the evenings when Grant came home late. No one had asked me to. I just needed something for my hands to do, something to keep my mind from drifting too far into the places I didn't yet know how to name. Grant didn't speak much after that day. He was busy meetings, long calls, last-minute trips, but every time he returned, he asked me the same question, Are you doing all right? And each time, I nodded, even if sometimes I wasn't sure the answer was honest. Then one evening, as we were having dinner in the small dining room just off the kitchen, Grant set down his wine glass and looked at me quietly. Claire, he said, voice low and steady. You can stay here as long as you like. No one's going to make you leave. But I want to ask you something. If you had the choice now, what would you choose? I looked up, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. I hadn't thought about it. Or maybe I had, but never with the courage to speak the truth aloud. I glanced down at my half-finished plate, trying to organize the thoughts that scattered like dust in the light. What does it mean to stay, Mr. Maddox? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured a little more wine into my glass and said softly, It means starting over. No running, no fear, no looking over your shoulder. I gave a small, sad smile. It sounds like something out of a novel. But Grant didn't look away. "I don't write fiction, Claire," he said. "I just want to help you rewrite your story, if you'll let me." The words caught something in my throat, not because they were poetic, but because they were plain, honest. He wasn't promising rescue. He was offering space, something I hadn't had in years. I sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the wind move past the windows, to the steady tick of the clock on the wall. I didn't give him an answer that night. I only nodded, a quiet thank you, and excused myself to head upstairs earlier than usual. But as I climbed the steps, my hand brushing the smooth wooden railing, I realized my chest no longer carried the heaviness it had held for so many nights. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, I understood the confusion inside me. It wasn't the fear of my past returning. It was not knowing how to live a life I might finally be allowed to choose. And Grant's question echoed in my mind. If you had the choice, what would you choose? I didn't know yet. But I knew one thing with quiet certainty. I didn't want to run anymore. I spent the entire morning sitting on the wooden chair out on the porch, a cold cup of tea resting in my hands, eyes following the quiet cobbled road beyond the front gate. Leaves drifted down in slow, silent waves, brittle and golden like the thoughts I still couldn't name. Grant's question from the night before lingered in my mind like a song half remembered. If you had the choice now, Claire, what would you choose? I was used to not choosing. I was used to reacting, adapting, surviving. So when someone finally placed a decision in my hands, one that was mine alone, I felt more lost than free. When Grant left the house that morning, he didn't mention it again. He simply looked at me and gave a quiet nod, as if he understood I wasn't ready. Not yet. I knew I owed him an answer, but I didn't want to give one just to fill the silence. It wasn't that I didn't want to stay. It was that I wasn't sure if I had the courage to face a life where I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, where I didn't already know who I had to be in order to survive. By early afternoon, I was helping Judith tidy the shelves in the library when the door opened and Elena stepped in. I had seen her only once before on an evening when Grant hosted a gathering in the main room. Elena had stood beside him with the ease of someone who had long been accustomed to rooms full of power. She didn't smile much, but every word she spoke was measured, clear, and calmly commanding. Today she wore a charcoal gray coat and a silk scarf. Her eyes lingered on me longer than I expected before she gave a slight nod. I returned the gesture, though warily. Judith seemed to sense the shift and excused herself without a word, leaving the room filled only with the steady tick of the grandfather clock. "I heard you're thinking of leaving," Elena said without preamble. I turned to face her, surprised by how quickly word traveled in old houses like this. "I haven't decided yet. I just need more time." She stepped toward the window, standing with her back to me. "I understand, but there's something you should know." She didn't turn around. Her voice was steady. "The people Grant Maddox lets into his life, there aren't many, and none of them are simply people he's helping." "What do you mean?" My heart beat faster. "I mean, when Grant opens his doors, he's not just offering shelter. He's offering something of himself. That comes with risk. For him, and for whoever he chooses." Then she turned, her eyes meeting mine. "Are you sure you're ready to carry that, Claire?" I didn't know how to answer. Her words weren't a threat. They weren't even a warning. Exactly. But they made the weight of my hesitation feel sharper, more real. I said nothing. Neither did she. Elena nodded once, as if she'd said enough, then walked out, her footsteps soft, precise, deliberate. That evening, Grant returned late. I was washing dishes after dinner when I noticed him standing in the kitchen doorway, hands in his pockets, leaning gently against the frame like someone used to waiting. I dried my hands, turned to face him. "I'm going to leave," I said, my voice calmer than I'd expected. "Not because I'm ungrateful, but because I need to know that if I stay, it's my choice, not a debt, not a repayment." Grant didn't seem surprised. He nodded and stepped forward, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. "You can leave whenever you need to. This door doesn't close behind you, and if one day you decide to return, I'll be here." There was no judgment in his voice, no hint of disappointment, only quiet acceptance, like he had already imagined this moment and had chosen to meet it with peace, no matter which way it went. I smiled, soft and grateful. Maybe freedom isn't in leaving or staying. Maybe it's in knowing you're allowed to choose, and no one is rushing you to decide. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no fear. And the next morning, I began to pack my things, not to run, but to figure out what truly belongs to me when I am no longer just surviving, when I am no longer anyone's victim, and when the life ahead is finally mine to claim. The morning I left, Savannah was draped in mist again, just like the first morning I arrived at that house. I packed my clothes into the one small suitcase I owned, the same one that had followed me through 3 cities, 5 temporary shelters, and more sleepless nights than I could count. But for the first time in years, I wasn't packing in fear. I wasn't flinching at every sound, rushing to shred papers, erasing phone histories. I simply folded my clothes and looked around the room one last time. Every corner held traces of the stillness that had slowly healed me. The reading chair by the window where I once fell asleep with a half-finished novel. The little wooden desk where I wrote letters I never sent. The soft glowing bedside lamp that had stayed on through my first night because I couldn't sleep in the dark. I rolled my suitcase into the hallway and paused at the top of the staircase. I knew Grant would be downstairs, where he always was, early, steady, and quiet, with his coffee and his newspaper, glasses low on his nose, hands never shaking, even when the mornings turned bitter cold. I stepped slowly down the stairs, and only when I saw him sitting there, calm as ever, did something in my chest pull tight. "I didn't think you'd be waiting," I said, setting my suitcase against the wall. He didn't look up right away. He placed his cup down first, then met my eyes with that familiar steadiness. "I'm not here to see you off," he said. "Just wanted to have my coffee in the usual spot." I smiled just enough to hide the crack beginning to form inside me. I sat across from him, letting my fingers brush the edge of the chair, trying to memorize the feeling of being there. When I was about to leave, Judith quietly appeared with a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. She didn't say a word, only looked at me with eyes full of quiet understanding. I opened it later, in the car, after we had passed through the iron gate. Inside was a hand-knitted forest green scarf and a card. "Not to take with you," the note read, "but to remind you there was once a place where you didn't have to be on guard." I closed my hand gently around those words. A place where I didn't have to be on guard. That single line stayed with me as the car pulled farther away from the city. I thought of every quiet moment that had slipped past me when I wasn't paying attention. Grant placing a coat over my shoulders one windy afternoon on the porch, without a word. Stopping the car so I could admire magnolia blossoms along Riverwalk after I'd mentioned I'd never seen them in bloom. Never pressing me with painful questions, but always noticing when my silence stretched too long. I used to think safety meant being invisible, that no one knowing where I was meant I had control, that an empty phone and quiet street meant I was finally free. But I was wrong. Safety is when someone doesn't need to ask to know you're afraid. It's when you sit across from another person and say nothing, yet feel heard. It's when you don't have to pretend to be strong, and still you're not treated like you're fragile. I didn't say any of this to Grant. I think he knew. And if he didn't, maybe he didn't need to know, to still be exactly who he had been. When the car dropped me off at the next stop, I lingered a while on a bench near a small cafe, watching people pass. Everyone carried a story, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was cut away from the rest of the world. I was part of it. I was still lost, maybe, but I wasn't hiding anymore. I pulled out my phone, opened the map. This time, I wasn't looking for a direction to run. I was looking for a place to begin, even if it was just a temporary job, a quiet apartment, a patch of silence where I could slowly answer the questions I hadn't yet dared to ask myself. I don't know when I'll return to Savannah. Maybe in a few months, maybe longer, maybe never, but I know this with certainty. I was once in a place I could call safe, and that has changed the way I see the world forever. I returned to Savannah on a late winter afternoon, just as the bare magnolia branches quivered in the cold wind and the sun dipped below the horizon earlier than it should. The city hadn't changed much, still the same winding cobblestone streets, still the slow clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages drifting past the squares like pieces of memory that never quite faded. I pulled my small suitcase along Riverwalk Lane, my steps instinctively finding their rhythm on the stones beneath me, as if I'd never left. When the iron gate opened, I saw Judith trimming the hedges that lined the path to the house. She looked up, neither surprised nor curious. She simply smiled gently and tilted her head toward the front door. I drew a deep breath. There it was again, that feeling without a name, like stepping back into a story I had only just folded shut, barely a chapter ago. I pushed open the door. The soft creak of the wood greeted me like an old friend. In the living room, Grant stood with his back to me, one hand holding a cup of tea, the other flipping through the pages of an old book. He didn't turn around at the sound of my footsteps. He simply set the cup down and turned slowly, like he had always known this moment would come. I stood in the doorway, unsure where to begin. All I knew was, I had come back, not out of fear, not to run or hide, but because I had thought it through. I could go anywhere, live anywhere. But peace, real peace, didn't grow just anywhere. and I had found it here. I had no speech prepared, no clever words to explain myself, no apology or justification. I simply said the only thing I knew was true. I'd like to stay, if the offer still stands. Grant didn't respond right away. He studied me for a long moment, then gave the smallest of nods. His eyes weren't stern, like when we first met, nor cold, like when he'd stood face to face with Jason. They were simply calm, relieved, like a man who had finally seen something arrive that he'd been quietly waiting for all along. He stepped closer, not to embrace me, not to touch my arm or shoulder in affirmation, but simply to stand near, close enough that I could feel his warmth. And then he asked something I didn't expect. "So then, how do you want to set the rules this time?" I blinked, surprised. "Rules?" He nodded, arms crossing loosely over his chest. "If we're going to live under the same roof, even if just for a while, we should be clear about things." I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. A short, unfiltered laugh that shook something loose inside me. I haven't thought about rules. I just know I wanted to stop somewhere that didn't wake me up at night with knocks on the door, or make me hold my breath walking through hallways. "Then let's keep it simple," Grant said, handing me the still warm cup of tea. "Rule 1. Everyone has their own space. Rule 2. No one digs into the other's past unless they're ready to share it. And Rule 3. Dinner is always on time." I looked up at him, half teasing. "That third rule, who made that one?" "Judith," he said with a soft smirk, and we both took our seats on the sofa by the window. The last light of day spilled through the cream-colored curtains, pooling across the thick rug where I'd set my suitcase down. I let myself sink into the cushions, exhaling slowly. I felt something easing inside my chest, melting. Maybe. Not because of words or gestures, but because of the presence of someone who wasn't holding me down, yet was still willing to hold space for me, if I wanted it. In the stillness, I turned to him and spoke again, gently. "What about Rule 4? He looked at me, waiting. I continued, my voice quiet and deliberate. "Rule 4. No one leaves without telling the other the real reason why." He gave one long nod. An agreement without paperwork, a contract without a signature, and I knew then, without ceremony or certainty, I had laid the first stones of a new chapter in my life. It wouldn't be perfect, it might not be permanent, but it would be a place I had chosen, and this time, not for anyone else, but for myself. A week after I returned, Grant told me to pack a few things. He didn't say where we were going, only that I should bring a warm coat and a comfortable pair of shoes. We left Savannah while the fog still clung to the rooftops, and the wind moved through the trees like it was trying to hold us back. I didn't ask questions. I knew that if he meant to tell me, he would. For the next few hours, we drove in silence, accompanied only by the soft hum of classical music and the steady rhythm of tires on the road. With Grant, quiet never felt heavy. He had a way of holding space without letting it close in on you. When we finally turned onto a narrow dirt road toward the coast, the landscape began to stir something in me, something old, something familiar. White-painted wooden houses with low fences, early magnolia blossoms clinging to the cold. It looked like a memory from a dream I'd had as a child and forgotten. The car stopped in front of a house tucked behind a row of tall pines. It was simple, well-kept, and deeply still, the kind of place time doesn't rush through. A wide porch stretched across the front, with 2 swing chairs facing each other. Grant opened the door without a key. It creaked gently, like an old friend saying hello. "This was the first place I rebuilt after everything fell apart," he said as I stepped inside. "It used to belong to my mother. Later, I restored it and kept it for myself." I wandered through the house slowly. Dark wood floors, the faint scent of cinnamon in the air, and framed photographs on the walls, none with faces, only quiet places. A dock at sunset, a wind-swept field, a red clay road disappearing into trees. There was something about the house that let me breathe, not just to survive, but to live. Out back, Grant led me to a narrow porch overlooking a still lake. The water mirrored the soft gray of the sky, broken only by the occasional ripple from a passing breeze. We sat in silence, 1 chair each, and let it stretch between us without trying to fill it. Eventually, I spoke, my voice soft, like I wasn't sure I wanted to be heard. "Why did you bring me here?" Grant didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on the lake. "Because I thought you needed to see something that didn't belong to your past. You've lived too long in the memory of others, Amy's, Jason's, the places you ran from. It's time you had something of your own." I turned and saw his hands folded in his lap, clenched gently. I knew he was saying more than his words aloud. I reached out and touched his hand, not out of gratitude or need, but because I simply wanted to. His skin was cool, and when our hands met, I realized whatever had once tethered us in silence and obligation was gone. What remained was understanding born from wounds that had bled, healed, and stayed visible. He turned to look at me. The caution that once filled his eyes was gone. There was nothing held back now. And in that moment, I saw the softness at the corner of his gaze, the quiet recognition that I wasn't there because he had kept me, but because I had chosen to stay. That night, we had dinner in the small kitchen, lit by candles that flickered warmly but simply. I told him about my childhood, about walking miles to borrow a library book, about the dream I once had of becoming a teacher, a dream I had buried beneath years of just trying to make it to the next day. Grant didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I paused, he said only one thing. You can still begin again. It wasn't advice. It wasn't encouragement. It felt like a door being opened without sound, without force. Just a new path, waiting, if I wanted to walk through it. That night, I slept beneath the slanted roof of a small attic room. The warmth of wood surrounded me like arms, like shelter. I lay on my side, listening to the wind tapping against the windows, thinking of the morning ahead. There was no dread, no fear, just the quiet understanding that I was no longer alone. And for the first time, I believed that a place could be called home not because it had walls and windows, but because it was where your heart could finally rest. That spring came late, but when the blossoms finally opened, it was as if the whole house had been dressed in something new. I woke early, brewed coffee in a sunlit kitchen, then opened the windows to let in the soft wind rising from the lake. Life no longer held the sharp winds at my back, no longer startled me with footsteps echoing down alleys I didn't mean to turn into. Instead, it was birdsong in the mornings, the gentle warmth of fresh pastries drifting through the kitchen, and unhurried conversations with Grant, sometimes with words, often without. His presence, steady and quiet, spoke more than any promise. I began revisiting old stories, short pieces I had once written and buried away on a USB drive I had hidden deep inside my suitcase. Each keystroke felt like stitching back parts of myself I had once torn away just to keep moving. I found work at a small-town library nearby, where children came on weekends and called me Miss Claire in voices as clear as creek water. No one there knew my past, and strangely, I no longer needed them to. I still carried my memories. I still remembered Amy, her laughter, her courage, and the night she disappeared from my life. I remembered every sleepless night, every whisper of fear, every breath I held in panic. But those memories no longer led me. They simply followed, quietly, like shadows in the late afternoon. Grant never asked for details. He never pressed. He just stood with me, like he did beside the lake, giving me room to choose my own silence, and in doing so, gave me the courage to speak, to live, to begin loving myself again. One evening, I sat on the steps of the porch with a cup of tea in my hand, watching the neighborhood children run through the yard in a tangle of laughter and bare feet, and it struck me safety is not the absence of fear or danger. It's the moment you finally believe you deserve peace, that you are allowed to stop running, that it's okay to rest. My story doesn't end in a fairy tale. It doesn't need to. I didn't become someone famous. I didn't win great wealth or power, but I found something I used to believe was a luxury reserved for others. A life no longer shaped by threats, no longer defined by what I survived. I am still Claire, the woman who once fell, once trembled, once retreated, but also the Claire who stood back up, who turned around when it mattered, and who learned that trust is not about promises, it's about who stays when no one is obligated to. And if you're hearing this now, maybe you've had days when you didn't know what you were living for. Maybe you've collapsed in silence, unsure if you'd ever rise again. But I want you to believe me when I say this. As long as you don't let go of yourself, every door can open again. What do you feel after hearing Claire's journey? Did it remind you of anything in your own life? We'd love to hear from you in the comments below, your heart, your story, your reflections. And if this story brought you something comfort, clarity, or courage, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this video. At times, dear single mom asterisk, we're here to bring you heartfelt, thoughtful, and inspiring stories every day. Thank you for staying with us to the very end. May you be well in health, strong in spirit, and may your days ahead be filled with quiet joy and peace. Until next time,